I welcome everyone to today's seminar on technical update on penalties and prosecutions under Income Tax Act. I invite today's chief guest, our past chairman, CA Nanduri Sai Babu sir, and also today's eminent speaker, CA Lakshmi Pawan sir, and also our branch chairman, CA Jonalgatti Srinivas Garu, and our Sikasa chairman, Chinta Raghunandan, and all the participants of this webinar. A warm welcome to one and all. Now I request chairman to proceed further. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Ravi,
Sir. Hello. I think there is some technical error at chairman's side. So I would like to introduce Raghu. Chief guest sir left అయినట్టున్నారు ఒకసారి.
అవును సార్ చూస్తాను సార్. Sir, speaker sir, chief guest sir has been left. Technical error, I guess. Sir, we will wait for another 2 minutes for the chief guest, sir. We will see, sir. Sir, can we continue, sir? Secretary, sir.
Raghu, I think you can introduce the speaker.
Okay.
Followed by sir can take the session. If chief guest join, we will ask him to give his remarks in the middle.
Okay, sir. So, good evening. Welcome everyone to today's session on 30th November on today's session on practical issues and interest and penalties. Technical update on penalties and prosecutions under the Income Tax Act. Today we have an eminent speaker with us, Lakshmi Pawan Garu. Lakshmi Pawan has an experience of 15 plus years specializing in corporate and international taxation. He has worked for more than 12 years in Big Four tax firms like PwC and Deloitte. She has worked for 2 years in Big Law firm Lakshmi Kumaran and Sridharan. He is also a certificate holder in international taxation from ICI. He has authored many articles on latest developments in taxation. He has also co-authored a book on direct tax ready reckoner for LexisNexis. He has addressed many seminars conducted by various study circles in Hyderabad, Bengaluru, Vijayawada, and Guntur. He is a qualified CA, qualified CMA, and a law graduate. Presently, he is associated with an MNC in Hyderabad. With this introduction, I welcome today's speaker, Pawan Garu, to address our gathering. Sir, welcome you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you one and all for giving this opportunity. I hope I am audible. Yeah, please. We will straight away go into the presentation. Before that, let me give you some brief introduction about me. I am Lakshmi Pawan. So as he said, I have done my practice of around 15 years in Big Four law firms and many other Big Four firms. So this is recently moved into industry, and I am purely on litigation relating to income tax matters. So putting my all efforts on the present role in the litigation. So I am presenting you a topic on the recent developments relating to penalty and prosecution. So this is mainly on the penalties and prosecution on today's environment and how it will be dealt. So the objective of my presentation is only to look from the legal front, not only from the provisions in the Income Tax Act. So we will deal with the provisions of Income Tax Act, but we will also consider the legal aspects present in the Act. So we will consider both the things together, and then we will proceed on this. So I'll quickly take you through the slides.
Sir, sorry to interrupt, sir. Chief guest has been joined the meeting. I request,
Sure,
sir. Sir, available, sir. Saibabra, sir.
ఇది కాన్ఫిగర్ అవ్వలేదుగా.
Sir, వినిపిస్తుందా సార్?
ఓకే సార్.
Yes, sir, వినిపిస్తుంది సార్. Sir,
Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, sir. Audible, sir. Sir, I am hereby by date of today's chief guest, Nanduri Saibabra Garu. He is the second son of his parents, namely Nanduri Lakshman Rao and Venkata Subbamma, and born at Guntur. Mr. Nanduri Saibabra Garu studied his elementary education in Sri Rama Vidyalaya in Guntur. He did his high school at Majedi Goravaya High School. He is commerce graduate from Hindu College. He studied CA with Mrs. Ramchandra Rao and Co. Guntur, and the last 1 year of his apprentice period with Mr. Tunugundla Gopal Krishnamurthy and Co. Guntur. He completed a CA in the year 1974. He had completed so many post-qualification courses like DISART, DIRM, and also FAFD. He is practicing in the name and style of Saibabu Rao and Co. at Ongole branch at Chirala, which is having also a branch at Chirala for more than 45 years. He is the 12th chairman of the Guntur branch of SARSF ICI, and at the same time, he is the first chairman representing from Prakasam district. His only son, Mr. Nanduri Sridhar, is also a CA who joined his father about 18 years back. With this, I introduce Mr. Nanduri Kotisrao Garu to the address gathering. Thank you one and all. Sir, over to the chief guest.
Thank you, Sikasa Chairman. Thank you very much for the nice introduction. My greetings and good wishes to all the members of ICAI who are attending this Zoom meeting. I am thankful to the chairman, CA Jonalagata Srinivas Rao, and Secretary CA Maddi Raviteja, Sikasa Chairman, and all the executive members of Guntur branch of ICAI Guntur for giving me this opportunity to interact with all of you. Many years after I am addressing my branch, I got affinity to this branch since a long time, as I have served this branch as an executive member, secretary, chairman of this branch since more than 6 years. When I took the charge as chairman, I have observed in the balance sheet of the Guntur branch, ICAI New Delhi is on the liability side of the balance sheet, that too with a huge amount. But when my term concluded, the said account was on the asset side of the balance sheet. This was possible by virtue of cooperation from all the members, and also so many economies we have adopted in spending out the income earned on seminars, etc. during my tenure. Today's speaker took very tough and dry subject, technical update on penalties and prosecutions under the Income Tax Act. He is capable to explain the subject in lucid manner so that everyone could understand the implications and complications which were crept in the Income Tax Act. One day in one seminar, there was a discussion about what is a good speech. One speaker gave a very good example. He compared the good speech with the garments of a woman, which should be long enough to cover the body and short enough to expose the beauty. That was the our chartered accountant only, it was said. About 25 years back quotation, I am reciting it. Okay. Let us wait and see the good speech of CA Lakshmi Power. With regard to our subject, just I will touch upon one or two things only, because the main part is the main duty is Lakshmi Power. Default in complying with the provisions or with the conditions prescribed under the Income Tax Act would attract certain penalty and critical cases prosecution also. There are three modes built in fiscal legislation for encouraging tax compliance. Charge of interest, imposing of penalty, launching of prosecution against evaders or offenders. Next one is the levy of penalty is automatic? No. Penalty under the Income Tax Act imposed unless the person concerned has been given reasonable opportunity of being heard. Next one is the mens rea. Regarding mens rea, our speaker will explain in detail. Penalties and prosecutions were updated in the Finance Act 2021 and applicable to assessment year 22-23 onwards. After which only one item I will tell you. 158 BFA2, that is determination of undisclosed income for the block period. In this case, the penalty itself is 300% of the tax leviable in respect of the undisclosed income. 300%. This is as good as hang him 3 times. But that is the thing. It is like that. Anyhow, all these things will be dealt by our learned speaker, C.A. Lakshmi Pawan. My thanks are due to chairman and managing committee members for giving me this opportunity. I once again thank one and all for the participants for their patient hearing. Thanks to one and all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, over to the speaker, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, sir. Thank
Lakshmi
you for
Pawan, you please continue. I have interpreted.
Sure, sir.
Okay?
No issue, sir. Thank you for that brief
Right.
introduction and the provisions and setting the tone of the presentation. Thank you, sir. For this presentation, actually, I took a different angle because penalties and prosecution, generally, anyone, if they open the act, they can read what is there in it. So, but I want to take up my practical exposure on penalties and prosecution, considering my legal experience and all. So I want to touch up mainly on the technical update. So update in the sense, technical update in the sense, how ground reality these provisions will function, how ground reality, the prosecution or the confession of the assets will function. So it is more on the ground realities and as well as interpretation of the section. So covering these two aspects, and these are the main motive of my presentation. And as you rightly said, the mens rea aspects and the penalty, all other things are also covered in my presentation. So I will quickly take you through the slides first, and then I will start introducing each and every provision of the Income Tax Act. So as I said, today our agenda is to understand the intent of penal provisions. So why it is introduced and what is the main objective of introduction of penal provisions in Income Tax Act, and understanding few terminologies associated with the penal provisions, and we will have a glance through at all the provisions relating to penalty and also relating to prosecution. And as the Act has provided to us a new concept of 270A, and also we have a new concept of immunity in penalty provisions, and we also see how corporates evade taxes and how they approach for the compounding of offenses associated with the procedural aspects in this regard. So I'll take you through the real intent of the penalty provision. So these are all extracted from mainly from many of the Supreme Court rulings without quoting the references for them. So the main purpose as held by Supreme Court in one of the leading case is to discourage any penal provision. The main objective of any penal provision is to discourage the violation of the law. So as a citizen of India, we should bind with the laws in the country. As long as we are within the rules framed in the country, there is no penalty or penal provision against us. The moment we violate it, knowingly or unknowingly, ignorance is not at all a condemnable aspect. So therefore, violation of law either by ignorance or by willful intent is covered as a penal attraction provision. This is the thumb rule for the penal provisions. And to enforce public justice, if I pay 100 rupees for my 1,000 rupees of income, the same tax should be paid by another person who is earning 1,000 rupees as income. So this is the enforcement of public justice. So everyone should be enforced. Everyone are liable to tax on the same income at the same liability. There should not be higher tax or the lower tax. So that enforcement should be there. Then only the responsibility of individuals or the citizens of India is established. And the third thing is publish the offender for deliberate infraction of law. If there is a deliberate infraction of law, deliberate deviation in implementing the law or following the law, then the same person should be punished. So that is a main provision for levying penalty. And next comes enforcement payment of tax in due time. So the tax should be paid within the due time. If there is non-payment of tax within the due time, then there will be interest, penalty, and prosecution as well. And the last one is to check and minimize tax frauds. So which is now what are all the search and seizures going on in various parts of the country recently taken up. So these are the main 5 aspects for a penal provision. And as rightly said by the introduction, Mr. Sai Babu Garu, the 3 distinct actions for infraction of law. So once if there is any infraction of law, deviation from following the provisions of the law, then the 3 provisions which will apply are levy of interest, imposition of penalty, and launching of prosecution. So these 3 will follow, and mind you, all these 3 are independent. If there is any interest, it doesn't mean that there will not be any penalty or prosecution. If there is interest, followed by penalty will be there, and followed by prosecution also will be there. All 3 are independent and all 3 are applicable on an offense. So therefore, we should consider it as each proceeding is independent, right? So then, as I said, each proceeding is independent. So where is it coming from? So it is coming from Article 20 of the Constitution. As per Article 20 of the Constitution, if any person is violating any law and has been convicted, right? So then the provisions of the Indian Penal Code or the Income Tax Act, whatsoever, subject to the offense where it is covered, the law will be harshly levied on the person. This comes from Article 20 of the Constitution. So what Article 20 says is, no person shall be convicted of an offense except for violation of law, at the time of the commission of the act, charged as an offense, nor be subject to penalty greater than that which might be inflicted under the law at the time of commission of the offense. So here the Constitution provides in the first limb 2 aspects. First thing is, every person who has committed the offense will be subjected to penalty or subject to be charged for the offense, but that subjectivity is based on the infliction or the limits of the law. It can't be forced beyond the limits of the law. We will see how that implies. And next one, the second limb talks about no person shall be prosecuted or punished for the same offense more than once. If there is an offense committed and that offense is committed with an willful intent, and therefore interest, penalty, and prosecution, all 3 will be levied. but each is a different type of proceeding. Each will be levied, but 2 times interest can't be levied, 2 times penalty can't be levied, 2 times prosecution can't be levied. So therefore, the Constitution clearly provides for one offense there will be no 2 punishments, but there will be different types of proceedings, but not 2 different punishments. So this has been held by the Japan versus ITO. The Supreme Court in this case has clearly interpreted this Article 20 and said 2 types of proceedings, that is penalty and prosecution, could run simultaneously, and that one need not wait for the other. So all 2 can run together. Interest being something on tax which they are recovering, so that will come automatically. And followed by this, CBDT also in many of its guidelines has given a reference or an instruction that when there is a quantum appeal or when there is a quantum edition which is liable for debate, so until and unless the debate is withdrawn, the proceedings of penalty cannot be initiated. Similarly, if suppose they are initiated, prosecution or penalty whatsoever are initiated, so those will be followed up, or those will be taken up on an independent basis. If suppose the quantum appeal is withdrawn or the quantum appeal is ruled in favor of taxpayer, then automatically the other proceedings like penalty, prosecution has to be withdrawn. So now knowing the intent of the law, as I said, intent of the law is only to penalize only the infractions, as I said in the initial slide. So only to penalize the infractions. So now comes the next step is we will understand what is penalty and what is prosecution. So as the initial speaker, presentation we have discussed, so penalty proceedings are civil proceedings. Those are not criminal proceedings. Those are civil proceedings, and by way of recent updates, starting from 2016 onwards in the Income Tax Act, all penalty provisions are automatic, provided they will be given an opportunity of being heard. So there is no mens rea required for a penal provision, because that is a civil crime. To treat it as a criminal offense, there is a requirement of mens rea. To treat it as a civil offense, there is no need for mens rea. So mens rea is not applicable in penalty provisions, not in the prosecution proceedings. So penalty is a civil crime, civil offense, and therefore penalty will be levied automatically by tax officer, provided a reasonable opportunity will be given. So the penalty proceedings in tax statutes are coercive in nature, imposing liability for speedy collection of revenue, and it cannot be equated with conviction or sentence for criminal offense. As I said, penalty is altogether in a different ball game. It is a civil proceeding. It is not a criminal proceeding. Mens rea is not at all required, and to prove whether I have committed the offense or not is mainly based upon the taxpayer onus. So the burden of proof moves to the taxpayer rather than the department. Prior to Dharmendra Textiles case law, Supreme Court, so it was a situation where the onus of proof will be both on the department or on the taxpayer, depending on the facts and circumstances of the case. But after inserting explanation 1 to 271(1)(c), it has been moved directly to the taxpayer. So now all the penal provisions are now consistently clear that the onus of burden of proof to say that I have not committed offense, or I have not committed or I don't have a willful intent for committing the crime or the offense, is on the taxpayer. The taxpayer has to justify or give proper explanation to come out of penal provisions. Otherwise, the penalty is automatic. If my offense is genuine, I have committed a genuine claim. So I will give an example here. In one of our case, what happened is in year 1, while claiming depreciation, we haven't claimed 50% of additional depreciation. So the accelerated depreciation we haven't claimed. In year 2, we rectified it by way of applying the same in the year 2. So then in year 2, the tax officer raised penalty proceedings saying that you are wrongly claimed, and he has disallowed in the quantum appeal the additional accelerated depreciation claim. So we said, I have done a genuine mistake in year 1, therefore to rectify that on a genuinely, I have done second year, the rectification of the year 1. Filing return of income in year 1 has lapsed. In year 2, I have rectified it. So this being a genuine lapse, we have put a case before assessing officer that I am bona fidely done and I should not be penalized for it. And my quantum appeal is also pending. So fortunately, in that case, even though the quantum appeal is there, the officer has levied penalty in our case, and we went to before High Court on a writ, and we got a favorable judgment saying that I have done a genuine lapse in year 1. So in the lapse done in year 1 cannot be a deliberate default for year 2. Therefore, both cannot be equated. It should be differentiated. Right. So genuine lapse and deliberate default should be differentiated, and that should come on proper or satisfactory explanation. If there is no proper or satisfactory explanation, then obviously whatever AO will be held, that will be taken up. So, and as I said in the initial slide, ignorance of law is no excuse for penalty. It is different in prosecution, but for penalty proceedings, ignorance of law is no excuse. And stay of penalty proceedings within the timelines provided in section 273 of the Income Tax Act, read with 275. So there is a process of granting a stay of proceedings, penalty proceedings, stay of penalty proceedings by tax officer, and all the all those procedural aspects I'm not covering because I want to cover the legal aspects rather than the procedural aspects which are available in a click of a button. So next we will move to, so these are the penalty, and we will now move to the prosecution. So we are understanding only the words enabled in it, and then we'll slowly understand what are the issues involved and what are the other things involved in this. So understanding the terminology, prosecution. So prosecution is a criminal offense. Prosecution is a criminal proceeding, and all prosecutions are like non-cognizable in Income Tax Act. And we will see what is that non-cognizable and non-bailable are available in Income Tax Act and how the proceedings will be initiated. So prosecutions are criminal charges or criminal offenses, and all CRPC guidelines, and in few cases IPC Indian Penal Code also will come into picture. So both Indian Income Tax Act and the Indian Penal Code will apply based on case to case for prosecution proceedings. And once if there is penalty, doesn't mean that there is no prosecution. If there is penalty, it is deemed that there is a prosecution also, and that will be followed immediately. And prosecution, as the CBDT has given guidelines, and many courts have held that it should be a rare case. It should not be a immediate case. In Income Tax Act, in GST it runs differently. In Income Tax Act, it should be run in a rare case, in extreme cases. And there are threshold limits, various threshold limits for launching prosecution. It is not so automatic like in the case of penalty. Though there will be an initiation of prosecution, but the execution of prosecution or the launching of FIR and all will be not an automatic. It is an extreme case. It is. And then in case of prosecution, the sections, when you glance through all the sections, it clearly says willful. The word willful is present in all the sections of prosecution. So meaning that there is a need of culpable mind or a mens rea for the purpose of levying prosecution. So if I don't have mens rea or culpable mind in case of prosecution, then in majority of the cases, it is treated as a bona fide offense, and therefore it will be compoundable or it will be vomited from the prosecution. And offenses generally are committed by not an individuals. Many cases, individuals will do the mistake by way of ignorance of law. In case of prosecution, because of ignorance of law, in individual cases, they are not heavily levying prosecution. But in case of companies, means like firm, LLP, artificial judicial person, whatsoever, in those cases, they are levying heavily prosecution. And recent trend also is showing that at least in Hyderabad judiciary, there are many prosecutions which are launched, but levying a penalty or the maintaining the case is different in Hyderabad situations. Now I will take you through the summary of penalty provision. So for today's discussion, I am taking up two main sections, 270A and 271(1)(c), and differentiate these two sections for penalty, for understanding the penalty in case of assessees where they file return of income. And in case of non-filing return of income, or in case of not filing tax audit reports, in case of SFT, specified financial transactions, in case of international transactions, all those things are there. So what I do is I will first glance through the provisions once, and then I will take you through the intricacies of 270A read with 271(1)(c). I hope this Excel is visible, right?
Yes, sir, visible, sir.
Yeah. So 270A is a recent section introduced introduced by Finance Act 2016, and it is applicable for assessment year 2017-18 onwards. So it is related to under-reporting or misreporting of income, and we will see the terminology what is under-reporting and misreporting in the coming slide. So in case of 270A, penalty for under-reporting or misreporting. For misreporting, for under-reporting, it is 50% of the tax adjustment, tax payable adjustment. So, and in case of misreporting, it is 200%. So here earlier there used to be 271(1)(c), where 100 to 300% is the 100 minimum, 300% is the maximum. But here it is only two limits, 50% and 200%. And it comes for under-reporting or misreporting. If you see the heading, every heading says failure. So here there is no failure. So in case of failure, I have to demonstrate that did I fail or not. But in case of 270A, I need not demonstrate, it is automatic. So there is no question of demonstrating my bona fideness, except in few cases, which we will deal separately. Right, so failure is the one which covers, and 271A for not filing a tax audit report or maintaining books of account. 92D, 271(1)(a). So this is mainly on international transaction or the specified domestic transaction. If I don't maintain or if I don't file proper documentation, so 2% of the value of international transaction or the SDT amount is the minimum amount. And similarly, if I don't file a report under Form 3C EAA, then 5 lakhs is the penalty amount. This is the standard penalty amount. Similarly, 271AA, admission in case of search and seizure. 271(1)(c), where income determined by AO includes unexplained investment and unexplained cash credits and all those things. So 10% to 60%, it will vary. Similarly, TDS defaults. In case of TDS and TCS defaults, these days many penalty and prosecutions are coming up. So penalty for failure to deduct. So here we have to see if I deduct and if I don't pay, it is different. If I deduct and I delay in deposit, that is different. So right now in here in this, the legal position taken by department is failure to deduct means failure to deposit also is equivalent to failure to deduct, and therefore in both the cases penalty will be applicable. Similarly, in TCS also penalty is applicable. And contradicting the provisions of 269 SS and T, where I have taken money in the form of cash for more than 20,000. So here amount equivalent to that amount taken is considered as a penalty amount. So these are the typical provisions. And coming to financial reporting, specified financial transactions. So in case of specified financial transactions, if an offense is committed by furnishing inaccurate statement, so 5,000 rupees penalty is applicable. There is no maximum penalty here. And as I plotted here, like in each and every case, is there any chance of reasonable cause or not? So in many cases, it is yes. Reasonable cause is yes. Like there is a aspect of, there is an angle of providing reasons to the tax officer. If I provide reason to the tax officer, then there is a chance that tax officer, if he accepts my reason, then there will not be any penalty. But in some cases, there is no such aspects. There is no reasonable cause. Therefore, I am liable to pay penalty irrespective of the reasonable cause. So these are the main typical provisions which are there. And some fringe benefits and all, just maintain it for the synchronization of sections. So these are the main penalty sections. And like for today's discussion, I want to restrict only to 271A, 270A and 271(1)C because these are the two recent updates which are there. So as I said, we will restrict our discussion only to 271(1)C and 270A. Like in 271(1)C, basis for penalty levy. So in case of 271(1)C, penalty is generally levied on two aspects, where there is concealment of particulars or furnishing of inaccurate particulars. So as the word specify, concealment of particulars. So what is concealment of particular? If suppose I disclose my all my financials to the tax officer and have claimed, say suppose section 10A deduction or section 80A deduction, and suddenly tax officer realized that I have a dividend income from 26 years and which has been not offered to tax. So is it concealment of particulars or not? Anyone from the audience? Okay, fine. So I will only answer it. So concealment of particulars is basically meant if something I received and something I have not furnished to the tax officer is concealment. So in case of where my income is offered from P&L account entirely, and where he is maintaining or pointing out any offense or addition based on my financials or based on my books of account, it is not concealment. If he is bringing out something differently from Form 26A or from other documents, then that is not that is clearly a concealment of income, and therefore my penal provisions will apply. So this is the aspect in 271(1)C. So there is an element or a subjectivity of debate whether it is a concealment or not a concealment. And similarly, furnishing of inaccurate particulars. In case of 271(1)C, I have to furnish a wrong claim, or I have to furnish a claim which is debatable in nature. So only if I do that, then 271(1)C applies. Whereas in 270A, as the recent provisions reads, so I will just take you the provision also for the understanding of the audience. (270A). So here, when this is applied is 270A applies when a person should be considered to have underreported his income. So when there is an underreporting of income, only then 270A will come into place. So what is underreporting of income? The income assessed by the tax officer is greater than the income returned or income processed under 143(1). So the thumb rule for 270A is the difference between income assessed versus income returned. This is the thumb rule for saying what is underreporting of income. So the difference between both simple mathematical formula, additions made in the tax in the additions or the disallowances are not considered as items of debate and penalty. Only the income, the resultant income between whatever I returned versus whatever he has made adjustment is the simple underreporting of income. And starting from assessment year 2017-18, we all started receiving penalty notices under 270A. So this is the main thing. And similarly, if it is an 148 return, then therefore income assessed is greater than the income return for 148 purpose. Or where there is no return, then whatever is income assessed, that will be the greater amount. So that will apply. So not only the normal tax computation, even the MAT computation is also considered. So if there is an adjustment in MAT, but not in normal tax, the difference is also under reporting. So unlike in case of concealment or inaccurate particulars, where the objective is to pinpoint the addition or the disallowance, here the objective is not to pinpoint the addition or the disallowance. Here the objective is to pinpoint the difference between returned income and the assessed income. So for normal tax purpose, what is the difference between assessed income and returned income? That is the only thing we have considered. So now going forward, in all these penalty provisions under 270A, the main agenda of the tax officer will be to point out the difference and levy a penalty on the difference. So the reasons for the difference is not a debatable item for the purpose of 270A. So the earlier whatever 271(1)(c) we used to saying that there is no concealment or there is no furnishing inaccurate particulars is different than this. So therefore, in 271(1)(c), the bona fide belief or the reasonable cause what we produce before the tax officer is not at all relevant for 270A. 270A simply goes by difference of income assessed and income returned. So this is the main thing, and that difference will be taken separately for normal tax computation, separately for MAT computation. And in case of loss, similarly, whatever is return loss versus the addition of income, the difference between these two will be taken in absolute terms, and that will be a charge for 270A purpose. And similarly, for 270A purpose, there are certain exclusions. For 270A purpose, there are certain exclusions. So shortly, these exclusions are where a taxpayer has given a bona fide explanation and discloses all material facts. In those cases, there is no penalty under 270A(6). So what are bona fide explanations? So I will give out some examples. False documents produced by a trust. So here is a case where there is a charitable trust to which I being an employee of a company, I have given a donation. To claim the benefit of the donation, I got a letter or a certificate or a receipt from a trust saying that I'm eligible for 80G. Based on that eligibility, based on that receipt, I have claimed my 80G deduction. And later on, after filing my return of income, the assessing officer pointed out that the trust is a fake trust, and the document whatever I got, for the receipt whatever I got from the trust is a fake document, is a fake receipt. So whether I am liable for penalty or not. So this is pre-270A situation. So in pre-270A situation is 271(1)(c). There the explanation 1 to 271(1) clearly gives an exclusion saying that if this kind of facts were produced before assessing officer, then there will not be penalty under 271(1)(c). But now under 270A, will that be a bona fide explanation or not? So this is factually driven case. If suppose I could establish properly to the tax officer saying that mine is a genuine case and I have given a donation and I have got a receipt for the same, then if it is a genuine case, assessing officer may grant immunity. Otherwise, I am liable for penalty. So this is factually driven, and we have to trust it in a new regime. But in old regime, it is clearly not taxable or not a penalizable offense. So these kind of bona fide explanations have to be given to the tax officer. Otherwise, penalty is automatic under 270A. And then next point is whether underreport income is determined on estimate, where underreport income is determined on estimate basis and accounts are correct and are not rejected by AO. So where this is a situation where there is a truck, example, CLF truck by a transporter. So he has sold a truck and he is claiming that he got a profit of, say, suppose 100 rupees. And he has maintained properly books of accounts and he has given that. Assessing officer says that is not 100 rupees sale, that is 120 rupees sale. So therefore, the 20 rupees difference between returned income versus assessed income, the 20 rupees is the difference. So on the 20, can the penalty be levied or not? The answer here is automatically it will be levied by way of 270A since it is automatic. But if the books are correct and accounts are not rejected, then that can be a case of no penalty situation. So the catch here is if accounts are properly maintained and are not rejected by tax officer, then whatever estimate of income he has done, that estimate is not a levy of penalty. So this should be noted, because if an order is passed under 143.3 saying that books are not rejected but income is estimated, so in those cases under reporting income will not come into picture. And third aspect is where taxpayer estimated a lower amount of disallowance but disclosed all material facts, like 14A. Say suppose in 14A there is a rule 8D which will apply. So in that situation, I hope everyone is aware of 14A. So 14A is where I have income from dividend which is exempt in nature. So example I'm giving, dividend income, like that any other income which is exempt in nature, then I should disallow the expenditure also. So example, I have invested 100 rupees or 1 lakh rupees in shares, and I got an dividend income of 10,000, and I have incurred only 5,000 towards the earning of that exempted income. So when I offer the 10,000 to my tax, I have to disallow, or when I claim that 100 rupees as exemption, then I have to disallow 5,000 rupees also, whatever the actual expenditure. So in this situation, say suppose there is a case where I have disallowed actual expenditure of my dividend earning income, and assessing officer applied rule 80. So in that situation, he has estimated the disallowance. He has applied rule 80 and enhanced my disallowance. In that situation, since I have disclosed all material facts and he has done 14-year disallowance on his own on an estimation basis, in those situations, penalty should not be levied. So this is an example I have given. Similarly, wherever this type of disallowances are estimated, in such manner, in those situations, when all material facts are disclosed, then there will not be any penalty. And similarly, transfer pricing adjustment made and TP report is not rejected, or TP report is accepted by the tax officer, or TP report is maintained in a proper shape. Okay, so in all these situations, whenever all the material transactions related to the TP transaction is maintained properly and all documentation maintained properly, if suppose assessing officer makes an unsatisfactory addition, so on that addition there will not be any penalty. Similarly, if there is any undisclosed income deducted in such operation, then the same will not be covered under penalty and 270A, but that will be covered under 271 AAB. So there is a separate provision dealing with such proceedings. So there the penalty will be considered not under the 270A. Now, as I said, the section is talking about two words: under-reporting of income and misreporting of income. So under-reporting of income, 50% penalty will be levied automatically. And if it is on account of misreporting of income, then 200% penalty will be applicable. So then the act says what is the misreporting cases. So section 271(6)(7) talks about 270A(6) talks about misreporting of income. In the following 6 situations are considered as misreporting. In these 6 situations, the penalty will be 200% of the difference of income assessed and income returned. Here the word starts about what are under-reporting income. So these are the cases which are under-reporting. Misrepresentation or suppression of facts. So those who are practicing service tax, they might have knowing about this terminology. Misreporting or suppression of facts. So whatever is misreported or whatever is suppressed, this is very different than concealment and inaccurate particulars in the earlier 271C. Though people are comparing both the aspects of 271(1)(c), saying that misrepresentation is furnishing inaccurate particulars, suppression is concealment. So there is an analogy going that misrepresentation is nothing but furnishing inaccurate particulars. Suppression is furnishing or concealing income. But we will see in the next slide what are these two words really meant for tax purposes. Next is failure to record investment in books of account. If suppose I intentionally did not disclose an investment made in one of the companies or one of the group entities, so that failure is also covered as misreporting, and 200% of penalty will be levied automatically. and claim of expenditure not substantiated by any evidence. So like I said, 80G, claim of a deduction. So similarly, claim of an expenditure. Say suppose I'm claiming something of an like project expenses or whatsoever, something regular expenses for maintaining my business and all. So I claimed an expenditure without having proper documentation. The moment I fail to produce records before tax officer, penalty will be levied automatically. Similarly, false entry in books of account. GST may that is now creating very big ruckus. So similar to GST here also, if there is any false entry in books of account, I've accounted a false entry. The moment I accounted false entry and the source or the origin of that entry itself is wrong or fictitious. The moment it is fictitious, penalty is automatic. And mind you, as I said, these are automatic. And the moment I fail to explain to the tax officer, it is automatically levied. The opportunity of being heard will be given only for show cause stage. Like they will ask you only a penalty notice, only to give you an opportunity to consider your reasons, but penalty is automatic. Levy is automatic. Officer cannot. The officer need not justify anyone. And similarly, failure to record any receipt in books of account, which has been bearing on total income. Any receipt, whatever is there, as per my form 26 says, I have income, but as per my P&L account, I don't have any income. The difference is very visible from the documentation. So the moment it is there, the difference is there, that will be treated as misreporting. So we have to be very careful on reconciling form 26 AS versus P&L account. So whenever we file return of income for any person, we should ensure that income from form 26 AS is matching with income from whatever income we are filing the return of income. The difference between these two, if pointed out by tax officer, will lead to misreporting of income and 200% penalty will be levied automatically. And similarly, failure to report any international transaction or deemed international transaction pointed out by tax officer, not the this penalty will come, and in addition to this, the 270 is other penalty, 2%, 50,000, whatever is there on the international transaction, those also will follow along with this. So this is for report filing, that is for non-reporting. And as I said, misrepresentation or suppression. So generally, outside people are interpreting misrepresentation is nothing but furnishing inaccurate particulars. Suppression is nothing but concealment of facts. But I feel these words are much bigger than that, because misrepresentation or suppression are like words which have been given the natural meaning or the natural dictionary meaning. It can't be taken as concealment or inaccurate particulars, which are already there in income tax act, because those words are used in a context where it is subjectivity. It is very subjective to prove that there is a concealment or there is a inaccurate furnishing of inaccurate particulars. And misrepresentation is something where even if I don't do intentionally, the culpable mindset is not at all required. The moment I misrepresented, either knowingly or unknowingly, or I suppressed either knowingly or unknowingly, intent is not at all has a role in it. So the intent not at all required. The moment I misrepresented or I suppressed some fact, which is not a bona fide case, it is treated as a willful evasion of tax, and 200% will come into picture. So misrepresentation, as per Oxford Dictionary meaning, the action or an offense of gaining a false or misleading account of the nature of something. So that false statement, whatever we make, that is misrepresentation. And similarly, suppression is the action of keeping secret or refusal to disclose or reveal. So whatever I refuse to reveal is a suppression, right? So similarly, whatever the 26 is differentiation between dividend income received and offered to tax. So those kind of things are also may fall under suppression of facts, without if that explanation, if that clarification is not given, specific clarification like this, failure to record any receipt, irrespective, if suppose it is not there, even if it is not there, it covers under suppression. And similarly, the Dharmendra Textiles, whatever Mensria is said, these Dharmendra Textiles clearly said for penal provisions, for penalty related provisions, not penal, penalty related provisions, Mensria is not at all an essential item. So therefore, whatever the suppression or misrepresentation is there, doesn't require any Mensria. Any willful attempt to abet is not at all required. And now, as we've seen, what is penalty under 270A and 271C. So now there is a new section called 270AA, where it gives us immunity, and this power has been given to the tax officer. So whenever there is a notice for penalty, and we know that the penalty is definitely leviable, and on the main appeal, on the quantum appeal, if we don't go on the quantum, we don't go to CAT appeals to buy peace of mind or whatsoever. If we don't go to the CAT appeals, the next appellate forum, and we are accepting the adjustment, then there is an opportunity given to us, to the taxpayer, saying that if I file Form 68 and I don't file any appeal because I am buying peace from the department, in that situation, immunity is straight away granted. And many cases where I have seen, the tax officers are very liberal, and even the CBDT instructions are given to the tax officers is very clear that immunity is given across all cases wherever penalty is there, unless and until it is misreporting. So if it is under-reporting cases, 50% of penalty you can straight away exclude by way of filing immunity using Form 68. And if it is misrepresentation, the case is gone. Definitely 200% penalty will be there on those situations. So in misreporting cases, we have to go to appeal, fight on the quantum. On the quantum, if we get some relief, then only penalty will be not levied. Otherwise, penalty is automatic in case of misreporting, and there is no waiver or immunity granted on misreporting. We will see the process. 270AA has been introduced to grant immunity from penalty and prosecution if an application is filed with the AO and the following conditions are fulfilled. Tax and interest have been paid and no appeal has been filed against the assessment order. In Form 68, within 1 month from the end of the month in which assessment order is received, if you file Form 68A, then AO can accept or reject, but practically AO is accepting unless it is a misreporting of income, is accepting and passing immunity orders. And this AO order once filed is a final and cannot be appealed against. However, writ can be filed on the AO order, on the immunity order. So with this, we have covered all the penal provisions relating to penalty aspects. Now we will proceed on to the prosecution. So this is where recently many cases are filed or many cases are initiated, both in Vijayawada I have seen, Guntur I have seen, and Hyderabad also, where many TDS defaults, even if it is more than 1 lakh, many TDS defaults have been covered and they are levying left and right, issuing notices left and right for prosecution, initiating prosecution basically. So as I said, in case of prosecution, section 275A till 280A are the sections dealing with prosecution, and in these sections, prosecutions are generally not cognizable. Means what is cognizable? Cognizable is something where there is an arrest straight away, okay, without warrant. Cognizable is something an arrest straight away without a warrant. Non-cognizable is there is no arrest without a warrant. So they will not arrest the person the moment offense is detected. So they will not arrest the person. There should be a court summon or a warrant to arrest the person. So until that time, the person can freely move in India, move everywhere, wherever he wants. So until that time, there will not be an arrest. So these are the offenses where arrest is not so automatic. So I've dealt with many of the sections here. So I've given each and every section what is cognizable, what is not cognizable, and what is bailable and what is not bailable as well, and where summons are required, where summons are not required. And in all these cases, minimum 3 months is the punishment which they levy. And for TDS, there are instances in Hyderabad at least many instances where they have levied 6 months imprisonment along with fine of 2 lakh rupees minimum. So these are the cases where cognizable, non-cognizable. Bailable is something where if there is an arrest going to happen, bail can also be applied for that. Just want to show you these are the offenses where almost 17 offenses are there, where relating to various aspects. I mean, I'm not going to in depth before. These are all apparent. There is nothing new in understanding these things. Only thing is there is a willful attempt, willful failure. So this willful is definitely there in many of the provisions, and this willfulness has to be established by onus is on the taxpayer to say that I don't have a willfulness. So willfulness is the onus of the taxpayer. And for the department, it is very simple. It just have to initiate the proceeding. I have to defend myself saying that I don't have that willful intent. So mens rea comes into place by virtue of the wordings of the section itself. Right. So these are the main sections. Now we will see how the prosecution is launched under procedural aspects. So as I said,
prosecution can be launched by who? The income tax officer and prosecutor. Prosecution can be launched by the income tax officer itself. Powers, prosecution powers.
Prosecution powers.
Income tax officer,
I will tell
prosecution
you.
issue.
Okay, procedural aspect I will explain you briefly. See, as I said, in everywhere prosecution, in prosecution there are several aspects. First thing is issuing a notice, identifying the offense.
Who will issue the income tax officer issue?
Tax officer has to issue. So identifying the offense, tax officer has to issue it. So once the tax officer issues that notice, identifying or collecting all the data relating to the offense. So what is his duty is, he is not at all a correct jurisdiction to launch the prosecution and all. He is just a facilitator. He is collecting all the information like an SI or a CA, whomsoever, in case of criminal proceedings, he will collect all the material, whatever he has. From income tax database, he will collect. Similarly, from SSC database, he will collect by way of issuing notices. He will collect all the things, and then his superior authority is CAT TDS. So he will give the data to the CAT TDS to analyze the case. So then CAT TDS also will give a show cause notice. A show cause notice issued by AO is not at all maintainable. Show cause notice has to be issued by CAT TDS only. CAT TDS will issue a show cause notice for prosecution, and CAT TDS will analyze the case, analyze the facts, and they will give us an opportunity to say, is it a willful default or is it a unwillful default, or is it an genuine lapse from the SSC. So these things has to be demonstrated before the CAT. So once if I demonstrate before CAT, CAT has a power to transfer the case to CCIT for the purpose of compounding of offense, because the offense has been committed. Since the offense has been committed, now that the waiver of that offense or the waiver of the consequences of the offense is only with the CCIT. So CCIT will later on decide either to accept the compounding of offense, whatever is the SSC is doing it, or he will make a complaint to the first class magistrate, who will then issue a summons or a warrant for the arrest of the person. So at that level only prosecution is literally launched, or the prosecution is levied on the person. Till that time, it is only the word prosecution will come as a show cause. So it is preceded by only a show cause word, but it is not at all a prosecution. For the purpose of giving it to higher authorities, all the lower authorities have to compel the documentation or compile the documentation, but not they are the proper authorities for leaving the prosecution. Leaving the prosecution is always by trial court, and the trial court has to trial the case, and then it will decide what is the offense. Is it a punishable offense or not? Under the Income Tax Act as well as under the IPC. So it will not only rule under Income Tax Act. It has to consider before IPC as well. Considering both the aspects, then only it will levy prosecution. Until that time, no prosecution. The word prosecution is there, but there is no prosecution. Hope I'm answered the question. So like the procedural aspect, whatever I have said right now, so this is the procedural aspect. So all income tax offenses are not cognizable offenses unless one or two where it is specifically mentioned. Those are all not non-cognizable offenses, meaning that there will not be any arrest without a warrant or summon. So there should be a warrant or summon under CRPC from the magistrate to arrest the person. Until that time, the person can freely roam in India. And similarly, the police cannot lodge an FIR, right? And if it is, next slide we will see when an FIR will be lodged. So police cannot lodge an FIR, and they have to only investigate the matter without they just have to compile the information relating to the matter, but there will not be, unless the order of magistrate is there, they can't do anything. In case of non-cognizable offenses, it is entirely in the jurisdiction of tax officer on the tax authorities to compile the documentation and investigate or prepare the documentation for next level. Otherwise, until that, there will not be any investigation also. The cognizance of such offense is directly taken by the magistrate upon a complaint filed by the jurisdictional officer. Jurisdictional officer here is CCIT or the CIT. In cognizable cases, in case of cognizable offenses, police can file an FIR and they can arrest without a warrant. In normal course, complainant and his witness are required to be examined on oath. So in general situation, what will happen is there will be an accused, there will be a complainant. So both the persons has to give an statement on oath to the magistrate, say discussing the case and giving the facts of the case, background and all. But since here the other side are public servants, they are not required to give a oath. Only the oath will be taken by the accused. And upon sufficient satisfactory grounds, only then magistrate will order for a summon or a warrant on an intermediate basis until the trial is completed. Only once the trial is completed, there will be arrest. Arrest in the sense the punishment will be levied. Until that time, there will be only an arrest or there will not be an arrest. It is only at the discretion of the magistrate. And at the discretion of the magistrate, there may be granting a bail with a security amount under section 88 CRPC. And similarly, on everyday basis, the accused has to, every day, in the sense, every hearing basis, he has to go and appear before the magistrate for at all times called for. So this is the procedural aspect relating to the prosecution. And like these are the three offenses where IPC and Income Tax Act generally comes into place. Basically, those are like forgery cases. Fabrication of evidence is a forgery case. Abatement in furnishing a false declaration, giving a false information is also forgery or a cheating case. And similarly, perjury and tendering of false evidences, giving a false evidence is also coming under forgery. So in all these three cases, both IPC as well as Income Tax Act will come together. So in these three cases, if these are the three cases, simultaneously arrest will come into picture irrespective of the Income Tax Act proceeding. That proceeding, Income Tax Act proceeding, will be separately carried out, and similarly criminal proceedings are separately carried out. And this has been held in this case law. The prosecution in criminal law and the proceedings arising under Income Tax Act are undoubtedly independent proceedings, and therefore there is no impediment in law for the criminal proceedings to proceed even during the pendency of proceedings under the Act. So both the proceedings under the Income Tax Act, under the Criminal Act, IPC will continue on these three types of offences. However, a wholesome rule will have to be adopted in matter of this. So unless and until if the Income Tax Act clearly says that, or the income tax authority comes and says, the first class magistrate upholds that there is a forgery or there is a evidence which has been tampered, so only then the IPC will follow, or the IPC has to follow Income Tax Act. So here, whichever proceedings are initially taken, so those proceedings are first will be carried out, and then the succeeding proceedings has to be taken up. Until then, the other proceedings has to wait. But both proceedings will be initiated directly. And in case of corporates, I mean, as you know, in case of individuals, definitely individuals are prosecuted and offenses can be directly attributed to the person, individual. But in case of firms, companies, LLPs, BY, AOPs and all, those are not the individuals. Those are run by individuals, but those are not the individuals as such. Therefore, in that situation, how to proceed? So section 278B of Income Tax Act clearly provides that these are, if these are the taxpayers, if firms, companies, AOPs, BY, LLPs are the taxpayers, then there is a vicarious liability both on the persons who are running the show and as well as the company itself, or the artificial judicial person itself. So in the artificial judicial person, they have to pay fine. On individuals, there will be prosecution plus fine. So the 278B, there are two limbs to it. In the first limb, they clearly says person responsible for the conduct of the affairs. Those who are running the show, those who are conducting the affairs, are prima facie liable for prosecution. So here there is no second thought that whether I am directly conducting or indirectly conducting. So here, those who are directly conducting are liable for prosecution. Those who are not at all conducting, only two things will be there. Either I am conducting it or I am not conducting it at all. So in case of sleeping partners or sleeping directors, since our independent directors, those are not at all responsible for the day-to-day operations of the company or the affairs of the business of the company. So therefore, those will not be responsible. But those who are on the ground, those people are working, those people are liable for the conduct of the affairs and they are liable for the prosecution. And similarly, there is another limb to it. Those who have consented, means those who have accepted the offense and they have had a hand in glove with the offense committer. Therefore, those people are also responsible for the offense, and accordingly, they have to be considered as criminal offense committers for the purpose of 278B. And here one catch point is the section clearly says person in charge. The word clearly says person in charge. And person in charge need not be a director, officer, or manager. So the person in charge is those guys who are taking overall control of the day-to-day business. Those people are the person in charge. So I will give an example. Say suppose there is a managing director, there is a CEO, there is a tax head, there is a accounting head, and there are junior staff. So in this whole hierarchy on the organization, the day-to-day affairs are generally run. It is established or it is understood that both by the MD and the CEO or the CFO, these are the individuals who run the show generally. So these are the persons who run the show on a day-to-day basis. So those are the persons who will be taken as a person in charge, not the person who is filing just a return or giving a challan for that. So not the lower level employees, only the higher level, especially the directors on the board. Those are the persons or those are the officers which will be responsible, and on those people only the offense will be initiated. Sleeping director, sleeping partner, no need to worry, there will not be case unless and until they prove that they are sleeping partners or the sleeping directors or independent directors. Until they prove that, there will not be any offense. But in some cases, the court has taken, the Delhi High Court in 199 ITR 87, it has clearly taken a view that on retired partners are also, if they have committed the offense, on retired partners are also you can charge offense, and they are also sent to they are also liable for punishment. And similarly, if suppose both the directors or all the officers of the company have proved that they are not party to the offense, in those situations, the company or the LLP, BOA, whatsoever, can be considered on a standalone basis. And on the standalone basis, the company will be prosecuted, means fine we will levy it on the company. And Income Tax Act traditionally has a concept of compounding all these offenses. So subject to certain restrictions. So and subject to certain additional fees to be paid. Subject to all these things, you can compound the offense. And these are the offenses where thrice in the lifetime of the company or the taxpayer can be compounded. Only 3 times. If it is beyond 3 times, the compounding is not permitted. Means an habitual offender is not is not exempted from law. So therefore, in case of habitual offenders more than 3 times, the compounding is not at all accepted, and they have to undergo the prosecution. So whenever here there is a catch point. So whenever we file a compounding offense, say suppose generally TDS defaults are there. So in case of TDS defaults, 2011, suppose 2011 TDS defaults are now prosecuted. Example. So if now they are prosecuting and now they are initiating prosecution on that. If suppose I'm filing a compounding application, then I have to file not only for 2011, starting from 2011 to till date, whatever TDS defaults I have done. Consider all those TDS defaults on a safer side, pay penalty, interest, whatsoever on those defaults, and then file a compounding application so that till the time, the 10 years time or the 11 years time, whatever offenses are there, TDS offenses are there, are considered as one application and then filed. So therefore, this lifetime 3 time can be considered at a later stage, and that will be helpful. So whatever offenses are there in once we file a compounding application, you should accumulate all the offenses till the date and then put in the application. So delay in deposit or non-deposit of TDS, token distribution, TCS, are covered in this 3 times cases, 3-time compounding cases. Willfully fails to furnish return of income, willfully furnishes false statement with respect above offenses, and similarly, any person being a party to these above offenses can file 3 times in his lifetime. Similarly, these are the cases only once in a lifetime. Suppose I am evaded tax, I have evaded penalty or interest. I don't have money. I have attempted. Since I don't have money at all. So in those cases, I can only once in a lifetime of that individual or the company, the compounding can be granted. Willfully attempts to underreport income. Willfully attempts to evade payment of tax, penalty or interest. Willfully fails to produce accounts or document. Falsification of books of account or other documents. Making a willful statement with respect to above, or acting as an abetting or inducting to commit the above offense. So acting as a party for the above offenses. So in all these cases, only once in lifetime, you can apply for compounding. And this is the main thing. So in these cases, compounding is not at all granted. Not at all considered. Committed by a person who was convicted by court. So is a habitual offender. So therefore, habitual offenders can't get a compounding for their offense. In cases where compounding application has already been rejected, they can't go for again compounding. A person who has enabled others in tax evasion. So here there is a very dicey area going on, whether a CA can be considered or not. So that facts and circumstances and subject to all other things, we have to see whether a CA can be prosecuted or not. But there are instances where a CA also, if he's party to the tax evasion, definitely proceedings are initiated against them. In GST, not in income tax at least. Offenses related to undisclosed foreign bank accounts, offenses under the Black Money Act, offenses found related to anti-national or terrorist activity, offenses under the Binami transactions, and all other offenses which are not mentioned in the earlier. So all those offenses which are not mentioned earlier, like TDS and all, which have been mentioned, those will not come. Any other things can't be compounded under the Income Tax Act. And this compounding is also not so easy. There are heavy penalties on this. The compounding applications has to file before CCIT or DGIT, and all taxes, interest and penalties must be paid. And while filing compounding application, the CCIT or the DGIT will tell what is the amount of compounding fees has to be paid. It is entirely at their discretion. So minimum 1 lakh rupee of the compounding fee will be there. And in case of TDS and TCS, it varies 2%. It varies between 2 to 5% per month. And similarly, in case of failure to furnish returns, 2 to 5,000 per day will be there. This is the heaviest compounding fees that they are charging. In addition to all the regular interest fees, late filing fee, penalties, and all those things, we have to pay this. And similarly, in case of tax evasion, 100 to 150% of tax evaded has to be paid. And prosecution establishment charges, minimum 25%, maximum 10% of the entire compounding fee will be collected. litigation expenses as decided by the CCIT or VGIT has to be taken. So all these things has to be paid to get the compounding application filed first of all. And post filed, he has to entertain the plea, and then there will be hearing on the compounding application. Post that, a discharge order or the summary will be granted. So this is the
As you
whole-
said, the compounding fees is 100 lakhs is the minimum. Apart
Mhm.
from the tax and tax evaded,
Hmm.
tax evasion దానికి against గా మీన్ ఇది ఎక్స్ట్రా కట్టాలా అది
ఇదంతా ఎక్స్ట్రా సార్, మొత్తం
అన్నట్టు.
అంతా ఎక్స్ట్రా. దీస్ ఆర్ ఆల్
మొత్తం
ఫీస్ ఫర్ యాక్సెప్టింగ్ ద కాంపౌండింగ్ అప్లికేషన్.
తప్పు చేసినందుకు ఇప్పుడు డబ్బులు కట్టి తప్పును ఒప్పుకొని ట్యాక్స్
ఒప్పుకొని
కడుతున్నట్ట
ట్యాక్స్ కట్టాలి అంతా.
అబ్బా. ఓకే
And until like these are all not small cases. Generally 1 lakh and above will be the TDS default. I'm talking about TDS because right now that is a hot topic going on, at least in Vijayawada and Guntur and Hyderabad. So in these three cases, hot topic is TDS. So 1 lakh or above, if there is a TDS default, in those cases this is applicable. But the amount they are collecting is more than 10 to 15 lakhs for 1 lakh of default.
Too much. Thank you.
And so with this, I conclude my brief experience on this prosecution and penalties. If anything
Okay.
specific doubts are there, I am definitely happy to accept those doubts and answer them.
I request all the members to please quote any questions to be raised. The speaker is very eager to have the questions. Myself having two doubts, Pawan Garu. For the assessment year 12-13 and 13-14, the penalty provisions will be the old penalty provisions only, no? 271 subsection 1 subclause
Yes,
C.
yes.
Am I right?
Yeah. 271 1C. Only from assessment year 2017-18, 270A will come. If suppose a notice has been issued wrongly under 270A, you can always fight on the notice and you can get relief.
Okay. One thing, one assessment order came to my table, to my table, whereas the SSC claimed 10% depreciation. In the assessment order, order claimed that since you have not filed any invoices and all, I am restricting the depreciation to 5% only. Whether it is misreporting or under reporting, please.
Depreciation
Assessment
you
order
claim
lo
10% and AO has decided it is only 5%.
Okay.
How can you give 5%?
5% why? Because utilization is not there. Whether it is 180 days utilization happened or not, there is a question.
So you have
That's
not
why I
given
am
the
restricting that
documentation
to
properly.
50%. Yes. Yeah.
So failure to provide documentation, definitely that will be covered.
Property is there. Property is there.
Property is there, but
Property has been
documentation.
value has been accepted. Otherwise, depreciation won't come.
Okay. Then you can claim that there will not be any penalty. Because as I said, just showing that slide. Exclusion clause. So he is estimating any disallowance, but all facts are declared.
Yes.
So in that situation, 270A will not come into picture.
Okay. Any members? So can we call it a day? Members, check in the chat box. No doubts means speaker is very happy. Can I request Hannah Mankareddy Garu to please give a closing remarks on this seminar, please? Go to Venkat Reddy Garu, the senior member in the Guntur, a practicing member. Sir, please unmute, sir. Sir, you are not audible, sir. Please unmute. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, and the speech is very good, very valuable.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, there is a doubt in the chat box by Sivaram Krishna. Pawan Garu, I have a small doubt. Please clarify. Is it MAT tax applicable to farmers producers company where income exempt under Section 80 PA? I think this is a penalty seminar.
Yes, sir. But I mean, seeing his doubt, where income exempted under 80PA. So basically, MAT doesn't talk about normal tax sections. MAT talks about only books of account. So MAT per se applicable even if it is a exempted entity or not.
Okay. I have another doubt, Pawan Garu. Short-term capital gain, short-term gain assessing officer is not accepting cost of improvement.
మీ వాయిస్ బ్రేక్ అయింది మళ్ళీ కొంచెం స్లోగా వన్ మోర్ టైం.
Is there? They are accepting the value of the asset, but is not accepting the amount which has been recorded in the books of account. So, on ad hoc basis, what are meant without any substantial evidence, he is disallowing 50% of that improvement which has been accounted for in the books of accounts. In those cases, penalty notice came. Can we succeed in that case or not?
So you can give only the bona fide reasons, sir. Whatever default or whatever the genuine cause for that differentiation in the value, so that you can give it as a bona fide reason and you can plead for it. But under 270A, the chances of getting relief is very low unless you file an immunity. It means accepting on the quantum and filing the immunity application.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Sir, any Sai Babu Garu?
Sir, you are on mute, sir.
Sai Babu Garu, please unmute. Unmute, sir.
Mr. Pawan explained very lucidly, as I have already expected. Everyone
Yes,
enjoyed his speech. Okay, thank you, Mr. Pawan.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, I thank you one and all for making this seminar a grand success, and every senior member who participated in this. I'm very thankful for you, and to my colleague. He's Pawan Kumar Lakshmi Pawan Garu is a GMCS classmate for me when I was completed my CA. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here, Lakshmi Pawan Garu,
Thank you.
to
Thank you very
hear
much.
you
Thank
as a
you, everyone.
speaker. Your speech is very excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
More and more, whatever expected.
Sure. Thank you very much.
You have been crossed the Raghunath Chinta and Ravi Chaja making this seminar very wonderful. Thank you. Take care. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you.